Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, it was good to celebrate the dude's birthday yesterday. Pleased to see Check and Conviction had a panel of people celebrating the dude's birthday. So many thanks, Linda. Going to carry on now with another dude video from a few years back. Well, you can always tell how old the video is. Kind of date it by the lack of music or the music at the start or the fact that he's not yet in his TARDIS. So this is before he moved. I think he was building the TARDIS, as he called it, his control room at the time of this particular video. Anyway, let's pop it up and have a listen and a watch of the dude talking about DeHaan, the bones expert. Let's just get rid of me, put me up there. Let's go click on play and click on full screen.
Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Hello folks, here we are again. A bit more of about the experts that Zellner has lined up for the potential evidentiary hearing that she has asked for. Now, this one is also another particular subject that I am particularly focused on, and that's the bones. I have never, ever been satisfied with the story, that goes along with the bones. It doesn't ring at all true. It seems, the prosecution basically is ignoring some of the obvious facts, and that's what Mr. John D. DeHaan, the bone expert that Zellner brought in, is going to tell us here today. So, I'm going to be going through his affidavit here. As I've said before, I'm going to hit the high bits. I'm going to hit the things that really are bringing what he's saying together and basically getting the meat of it. So, we'll go ahead and start where we did with Mr. Gershman. Why should we listen to Mr. DeHaan? Who is Mr. DeHaan, and why does his opinion matter at all when it comes to burned cremains? Right? Okay. Fair question. So let's find out right here.
Upgrade what you drive at Vanarama.com and find your new lease of life.
I, John D. DeHaan, PhD, am currently an independent forensic scientist fire consultant. A copy of my CV is attached as Exhibit A in this affidavit. In the course of my professional practice, I have been a forensic scientist / criminalist since 1970. Have served with the Alameda County Sheriff's Department, California Department of Justice, Bureau of Forensic Services, and the U.S. Treasury Department, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. I have served as the president of FireX Forensics, Inc. since its incorporation in January of 1999. I have been involved with various aspects of fire and explosion investigations since 1971. In the past 12 years, I have testified as an expert witness in over 50 cases. Information about those cases is listed in Exhibit A. In the past 30 years, I have authored a major textbook, co-authored one textbook, chapters in 3 textbooks, and over 30 articles. The titles are listed in my CV, Exhibit A. I have been retained by Kathleen Zellner & Associates, PC, to review all of the available evidence in the above captioned case, including trial testimony, police reports, maps, photographs, animated reconstructions, and forensic anthropology reports pertaining to the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the skeletal remains of Teresa Halbach on the Avery salvage yard. A list of materials I reviewed is attached as Exhibit B in this affidavit. All opinions expressed in this affidavit are based on a review of the materials submitted to date and reliable published data, as well as extensive personal knowledge of laboratory analysis, fire dynamics, ignition processes, flame speed, fire growth, and fire and explosion indicators. They are expressed in a reasonable degree of scientific certainty based upon my expertise in the field of forensic fire and fire debris examination. If additional information becomes available that has a bearing on these conclusions will be amended or supplemented appropriately. Okay, so there's Mr. DeHaan's qualifications. So he's had pretty extensive experience with this subject. So, okay, let's move on to the next bit. Now we're going to see him talking about, Leslie Eisenberg's findings, and he's going to basically say that there was only 40 to 60% of the bones found in Stephen's pit. He's going to talk about the bones found in a burn barrel. He's going to talk about the bones being found at the quarry pile, but he's going to point out that Leslie Eisenberg supposedly said she couldn't identify those bones as being human, which is quite odd. But he says, but she did say at trial that they were calcined in precisely the same way that all of Teresa's bones were in Stephen's pit. So they had degraded a fire had caused them to degrade in exactly the same way to the same exact extent as the bones that were in Stephen's burn pit. So that's what this expert is basically looking at, going, look, I believe that this is one of the human bones. And he's basically, he's just saying this so that people understand why he's saying that, because even though for some reason Leslie Eisenberg tried to, I guess, not want to step too far and say that bone was human, but he feels pretty sure about it, especially, like I said, especially because it seems like the fact that the calcination was so exactly the same, that leads him to believe that it was burned with all the other bones that have the same degree of calcination. So we'll move into this document now. The fragmentary skeletal remains examined by Dr. Eisenberg constituted only an estimated fraction from 40 to 60% of the total mass of expected skeletal remains from a person of Teresa Halbach's size. Dr. Eisenberg determined that the defects observed in the cranial fragments from Stephen Avery's burn pit, which were linked to gunshot wounds through the examination of radiopaque particles observed in radiographs, were created before the burning event. Dr. Eisenberg was unable to determine with any certainty whether the bone fragments in tag 8675, which appeared to be from a pelvis, were human in origin. However, Dr. Eisenberg testifies that these bone fragments were burned and calcined to the same degree as the bones recovered from the Stephen Avery's burn pit. Further, Dr. Eisenberg identified the two bones recovered from the Manitowoc County gravel pit were still articulated. That is, that they still had, like, kind of some ligaments maybe, or something that the bones were still mechanically holding together. So that's interesting. Okay, so we see him bringing up the fact that there were only 40 to 60% of Teresa's bones found in that burn pit. Okay, if you remember, the defense's expert at trial claimed, because he had experience with remains being burnt and being moved, so he had experience with second or multiple burials or multiple burn sites. So even he said that is usually an indicator when you have that approximate percentage of the bones left. That usually is a pretty huge indicator that the bones have been moved from the original burn location. So that is where these two gentlemen seem to agree. So that's corroborative, and to me that's significant. So then you see in here where he's talking about this hip bone that she said she couldn't definitively say was human or not, but that she did go on to say it was calcined in just exactly the same degree as Teresa's bones were in Stephen Avery's burn pit. So the fact that they had the same level of degradation kind of suggests that they were together, and the fact that this hip bone was still, I guess, articulated with part of a femur. It was still articulated with another piece of bone that was still staying mechanically attached somehow, or maybe some ligaments were just barely holding it in place still, something. But it was actually, when they found it, still kind of mechanically attached. What's significant about that is that when you move bones, that's when they tend to lose those attachments, and they get, they break up, and the joints come apart because the ligaments and everything, they're all burned and dried up and basically almost turning to dust. Well, they disintegrate when you move the stuff, and the bones start falling apart. So the fact that this bone, in my mind, the fact that this bone is found over there at the quarry, still mechanically intact, means that is a bone that didn't get disturbed. It got left there, and it didn't get moved too much, and therefore it still had a mechanical attachment. So that's just that's my opinion by reading what Mr. DeHaan has to say, but I'll let you guys make your own decisions, of course. Let's move on to the next document. Teresa Halbach's body was not burned in the burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage. It is further my opinion that the body was not burned in the burn pit. This is based on the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the remains, the findings of similarly charred calcined fragments in burn barrels and other locations on the property, and the absence of the more massive fragments that normally resist such exposure. I disagree with Dr. Eisenberg's opinion that the main destruction of the body took place in the pit. Based merely on the amounts of remains recovered from the pit compared to the small fragments found elsewhere in two locations, one being a burn barrel from behind Barbionda's residence and the other a burn site in Manitowoc County gravel pit. On this issue, I agree with Dr. Fairgreaves' testimony that the location where most of the burned remains are found is not in itself proof.
Live streaming can be tricky, and sometimes trying to find the right software
Of the location of the fire that destroyed the body. I have observed transfers of heavily burned remains under a variety of conditions that resulted in the largest amount of the fragmentary remains being transferred to another location, with the loss of anatomical relationships. As stated above, the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the human bones recovered from Stephen Avery's burn pit indicates that Teresa Halbach's body was not burned there. Therefore, it is my opinion that someone transferred Teresa Halbach's bones to Stephen Avery's burn pit. The discovery of larger fragments outside of the margins of the burn pit, and the finding of the human bone fragments with similar degrees of fire damage in numerous other areas, including burn barrels on the site, it is also consistent with the dumping of burned remains into the pit with some rolling away. I have observed the survival of numerous calcined small bones after being dumped from a burn barrel or a similar enclosure onto a tarp or examination table. It should be noted that there are numerous steel vessels on the salvage yard and surrounding properties that could have been used to burn a human body. These were not examined. The wood-fueled boiler and smelter were examined by S.A. Pevito, and no residues were detected there. The state's theory of burning is incorrect. From my review of documents provided me, the state represented to the jury that Miss Halbach's body was burned in an open-air burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage from around 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 31st of 2005, a period of only 4 hours. Based upon my review of the descriptions and photographs of the bone fragments analyzed by Dr. Eisenberg, the state's theory is not supported by the physical evidence. As described above, burning a body in an open-air pit takes 6 to 8 hours to accomplish thermal destruction to the degree I observed in Dr. Eisenberg's reports and photos. It is my opinion that the burned bones found in Stephen Avery's burn pit could not have been burned to the degree I observed after 4 hours of burning in an open-air pit like the one behind Stephen Avery's garage. It is my opinion that the state's theory was also incorrect in its assertion that the burned vehicle bench seat was used to fuel the burning of Miss Halbach's body. The burned remains of the bench seat were not found in the burn pit, but near it. Its involvement in an external fire to aid the combustion of a body in the burn pit is speculative and unsupported by any document I have reviewed. It is my opinion that the state's theory was also incorrect in its assertion that burned bones were intertwined with metal belts resulting from the burning of tires with the body. The state represented to the jury that the bones were fused with the metal belts in a manner that suggested that the tires from which the steel belts came were burned with the body and in Mr. Avery's burn pit. Based upon my review of the photographs taken on November 8th of 2005 and November 10th of 2005 on the occasion of the second excavation of Stephen Avery's burn pit, the bone fragments appeared to be simply mixed among the metal belts. I have had personal experience with the burning steel belted automobile tires in combination with human bodies. During fire exposure, the steel multi-strand wires degrade, break, and fray to form bristles that readily trap any material that comes into contact with them during or after the fire. Small calcined bone fragments are especially easy to trap. This has been observed in test fires where the tires were under or alongside a burned body as well as on top. It should be noted that S.A. Sturdivant, Special Investigator Sturdivant, noted that the guard dog's lead was sufficiently long enough to allow him to reach the burn pit. Some of it, anyway. A quantity of the tire wires belting was observed to be tangled in with the dog's lead at one point. The recovery of item 7946, commingled metal, battery jumper cables, and dog leash recovered adjacent to the burn pit appears to confirm that. Dragging the tire remains across the burned debris fragments after the fire would result in the accumulation of fragments in the wire. The burn pit may have been used previously to dispose of tires, and the oily black residue described by Special Investigator Pevito as lining the pit in the excavation of the 10th of November 2005 would support that. So there was no evidence that the entrapment of the debris occurred during the fire that consumed the remains. From my review of these photographs, the reports generated by law enforcement agents at the scene, and Dr. Eisenberg in later examinations, there is nothing to suggest that the tires were in fact burned with the human bones recovered in Stephen Avery's burn pit in the manner described by the state. Okay, folks, so there we have it. There we have it. KZ's bone expert, is basically telling us what we already basically know. We could tell from watching MAM. Even Leslie Eisenberg said bones were moved. However, she said they were moved from the burn pit to inside of a burn barrel. Ridiculous. Okay, I could have possibly believed an animal might have dragged bones to, say, the quarry pile. Okay, not if those bones were articulated. Still, two bones were articulated together. No, upon getting dragged, there would no longer be any attachment between the two separate bones. But I could believe that possibly an animal could have dragged it to the quarry pile and left it there, but I would not in a million years be able to buy the story that an animal drug a bone from Stephen's burn pit into a burn barrel over at Barb's. No. Sorry. Not happening. So, we have all three. Even we have the two that were at Stephen's trial that agreed bones were moved. And now we have this third one, KZ's expert, Mr. DeHaan, who now agrees that bones were moved, and he basically confirms what the defense expert said at trial, that when you find the approximate percentage of 40 to 60% of the bones, you basically get an indication right there that these bones have been moved. Because if it was the original burn site, you would have something close to, between like 85 and 95% of the bones, or like 80 and 95% of the bones. But when you end up having something so low as 40 to 60, you know that you have most of the bones there, but there's probably another site where some got left behind. And that's why you have a significantly lower percentage, but you still have most of the bones. So he basically confirms what the defense expert said at trial. And, this is obvious. The fact that the state is still resisting this and doesn't understand people's issue with the bones is just mind-boggling to me. That I don't believe that they don't understand our problem with the bones. I believe that they just don't want to deal with it. That they don't want to have to, they just hope that this all goes away. Ken Kratz is at CrimeCon today, talking, saying something, is he talking about the Avery case? Because after my video that I just did, right? That if he's still talking about the Avery case at this point, that the Kathleen Zellner's expert on prosecutorial misconduct has already stated that the more that Ken Kratz continues to go on talking about this case and defaming Stephen Avery and everything is just more and more prosecutorial misconduct. Even though he's no longer a prosecutor, it's bad ethics for him to continue to do what he's doing. So maybe he's not talking about making a murderer over a crime con, but I saw a tweet that would seem to suggest differently. But hey, the point is that, you know, he probably is over there just talking about Stephen Avery's case. And we'll probably find out what it is he's saying later. But anyways, so what we've got here is that another bone expert that has basically confirmed these bones moved. These bones they did not start in Stephen Avery's burn pit. And the fact that we have that bone over at the quarry that was still articulated. Okay? Now I know a lot of the people who believe that Stephen is guilty are going to say, oh no, that bone wasn't human. Leslie Eisenberg said that bone wasn't human. Yes, but she also said it was calcined to the same exact extent as the bones that were found, Teresa's bones that were found in Stephen Avery's burn pit. That exact level of calcination, that same exact level of degradation suggests to me that they started together. Okay, and the fact that those two bones there at the gravel pile were still articulated, still kind of together, tells me that they were probably the least disturbed of the bones, and that is probably pretty close to the starting point of where these bones began. So, I think this guy's great, Mr. Dr. DeHaan. You know John D. DeHaan here, PhD. Stellar observations, and like I said, it seems to go along with what the previous expert has said, and so therefore it is corroborative and gives it a little bit more weight. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you later.
Well, thank you, Eric Cozy. Yes, interesting, isn't it? The Ken Kratz talking about the case, and Bennett Gershman saying that is prosecutorial misconduct. But as we saw in a tweet just this morning from TikTok Manitowoc, look at all the people that have gone into hiding. Ken Kratz, Tom Fallon, Mr. Winter and Mr. Williams. Haven't heard anything from them. But certainly if Ken Kratz decides to keep on talking, if you forgive the pun, he's just adding more fuel to the fire. But of course, this business of the bones being found and intertwined, yes, Ken Kratz very much tried to make it say as if the wires of the steel wires from the tires were sort of fused with these bones. No such thing. No such thing. It's just, again, it's just trying to create images in people's mind, things that just didn't happen. Interesting that Dr. Hahn used the term within a certain degree of scientific certainty, but clearly there's experts that look at these scenarios and have far more knowledge and expertise than others. And I'm certainly with John DeHaan on his assessments. And I think Aaron Koza makes a very good point that this one pelvic bone that was still attached to another bit of bone, yes, that's probably the starting point. That's probably where the bones were burnt originally, because of the fact that they were still intact. And of course, they were the very bones that Kathleen Zellner wanted to test. But it's not surprising, is it, that the state don't want to talk about the bones after they handed them back, despite the Wisconsin statute that Norm Garn was responsible for partly writing. In fact, I think he was mainly responsible for writing the statute, the preservation statute, and for him to be one of the ones that got together with Fallon and Uyghur to hand them back. It just beggars belief, doesn't it? Who would have thought that they would have done that? They would have got together and conspired to do that. Of course, no thought whatsoever that they were ever going to get caught out. Anyway, as I say, another great video from the dude. Say happy birthday, dude. Yesterday, we'll get another one of his tomorrow, hopefully. And I know that Mr. Dassey is keen to have another chat with us all on Saturday. So see you about 8 o'clock my time, 2 o'clock over there in Two Rivers. Till then, see you later. Bye for now.